Welcome to the Be Ready podcast, a space for parent, community, and classroom educators to come, learn, and share so that children are strong academically and that they develop into successful, thriving adults. Here are your hosts, and welcome to the conversation.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Be Ready podcast. Thanks for tuning in. So we're going to jump right in today. You know, we all like a good kiki, ha-ha, little cackle every now and then. So we wanted to start with a video from one of our favorite comedians that makes light of a very serious topic that we're going to talk about today. But we're going to start with a little giggle.
People be having all type of different names for legit medical conditions. We know diabetes can become the sugar, and hypertension, high blood pressure can become just the pressure. But anxiety can be, his nerves bad. Chronic anxiety, nerves real bad. Having spells could be a whole wide gamut of things. This autistic children on TikTok, her mom, should be having her spells. And that's, she could be stimming, right? One of her moods could be easily bipolar. Even one of his moods at the manic state or depressive state, or he just moody. Could be, depression or chronic depression. In the movie Life, Bokeem Woodbine, they were like, well, that boy just can't get right. I believe he was mute. I don't think mute is the right term.
For me, is not the correct term now. It's nonverbal. But I think that just is a perfect example of how we haven't historically given medical conditions and mental health conditions the respect that they're due. What do you all think?
I agree. It's been taboo, especially in our community, even to say that we're talking to a therapist or, working through and self-care in the way that we need it. And it's so important. I think that's a big thing that came out of the pandemic era, right? So it's all of these realizations that we need more than sometimes we let on.
Yeah, I think it also maybe speaks to our culture and the medical profession and mental health profession, right? Is that we've kind of diagnosed ourselves or used some of that terminology to say, oh, she's got sugar. I know that it took me decades to figure out what sugar meant because I remember hearing my grandmother say that, no idea. Or being able to make light of some of the mental health things that are going on, and maybe not to make light of them, but just that's our way of owning it and us figuring out how we handle it as a culture compared to leaning in on mental health professionals or medical professionals because of all the things, right?
Yeah, and I think the side that sometimes we don't talk about it, we all might have someone in our family or a family friend, and instead of calling it what it is, a lot of times we'll, try to keep it a secret or make it something that people don't talk about in the family. And so I think that makes it difficult for us to try to look at healing as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Vernicca. So that is a perfect segue, right? For today, I'm very proud. We are proud to have on our podcast today, our guest, Mrs. Vernicca Wynter, right? She's an international leadership wellness speaker. I know she's passionate about helping people discover personal peace and create positive cultures. She is certified in social emotional intelligence, and she is a social emotional intelligence coach, mind body medicine facilitator, and so glad to have her here tonight. Thanks for joining us, Vernicca.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. I appreciate you guys having me.
Yes, thank you. And I know that you had lots of experience in this realm, especially when it comes to schools, right? So tell us a little bit about your background and your work with social emotional intelligence and mental health.
Yeah, so I was raised by a mother with mental illness. And so I always had an interest and a passion for how to navigate mental health. And so when I was in school, I was always looking at, how can we continue to create the future that we'd like for ourselves to find emotional balance, to find peace. And so after I went to school for my bachelor's in communications and psychology, I started as a teacher at the high school level, and became an administrator in middle school, and then a school principal and a director of mental health. And so in all of the avenues that I explored in education, it always came from a lens of how can we help from a social emotional perspective? How can we build connection in our communities, especially our underserved communities, and ensure that those who feel unseen can feel seen? And I think that's at the core of mental health and wellness, is our ability to feel connected, to feel well, and to be able to navigate difficult situations. And so my passion for social emotional intelligence really grew when I became a mom. So I have two little girls. One is 10 and one is 12. And so they have continued my journey in how we can really put mental health at the forefront of how we operate in our daily lives.
Thank you. So, thinking about your experience in schools, right? What are some of the things that you have experienced in your schools, right? Dealing with mental health of your students, and what are some strategies that you've utilized to help them cope with just the daily life as a student?
Yeah, I think nowadays there's an increase in anxiety, and oftentimes a lack of resilience. And so that creates a lot of pressure for children, especially when they're on social media and they're, comparing themselves to their peers. And so I think that kind of increases some of the anxiety that many of us would feel naturally, but it's just escalated when you are on social media and comparing yourself to so many other people. And then also that social isolation. I think technology can be great, but sometimes it has impacted the ability of our youth to navigate socially and to build genuine relationships face to face, and conversation skills, and talking instead of texting, and just things that we took for granted when we were growing up. And now you're kind of like, all right, we got to like start with the basics and just how to talk to people again. And so those are some of the common things that I've seen. And so I think it really just starts with, starting to build resilience, starting to build coping skills, having the conversation, not to minimize the stress or the anxiety that kids are feeling, but to have some empathy and really create a space where they can communicate those thoughts, communicate those feelings. Uh, because a lot of times I think when we were growing up, it was kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed out. And your parents would be like, what do you got to stress about? You don't pay the bills. You don't,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have a
You
job.
have a job. Yeah.
And so I think, now it's crucial for us to, acknowledge that their feelings are real. That's their reality. And so instead of minimizing, how can we create a space that they feel like we understand and can empathize with the reality that they are living in? And how can we give them the tools to navigate the new reality that they have to navigate each and every day?
That's so true. I want to ask, like, what are some tools that you recommend or that you've used in the past to create that space? Because you mentioned resilience a couple of times. And when I worked with kids in foster care, I got so mad when people would tell them they would talk about resilience and talk about grit. And for them, I was like, can we like change the systems that require them to be so resilient and gritty instead of just like, telling them to build this capacity? Like, I recognize that that's something kids need, but I think it goes too far sometimes. So, like one time I was working with this girl, and she her mother had passed. She wasn't with her father. She was taken from him, and she wasn't with like her brothers either. And she's doing horribly in school, which you would expect, right? And then the I forget what the term is, but it's like a lawyer that they were assigned to like work on her case.
Advocate.
The
Yeah,
advocate.
educational one, was like, if you just, be resilient and work really hard and get like, a 2.5 or whatever GPA, you can graduate and go be with your brother. Like, don't you want to be with your brother? Why won't you work hard? And I'm like, because life, like, social thing. So I say all of that to ask, like, what should adults in like schools or summer programs that are coming up, like what should they be doing to set up environments where kids can thrive, like academically or in the ways that you would want them to, because they feel well mentally and socially?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like the first thing that we have to do are our own well checks and our own emotional check-ins. So I'm a big proponent of mindfulness and emotional awareness. And so at the foundation, I think the first thing that parents and educators have to do is be aware of their own emotional states. And so throughout the course of the day, making sure that we are checking in with ourselves, because that directly impacts how we are showing up for those that are counting on us in the classroom, in the hallway, during lunch, at the car line, And so I say it starts there. And also being present, creating time to genuinely connect. Oftentimes we're on our phones, we're checking email, we're trying to cook, we're trying to watch TV, we're trying to do all these things. But, creating a space of being fully present to engage with children, I think is a powerful opportunity. Oftentimes we don't engage with ourselves, our spouses, our best friends in that way either. And so I think, just as a foundational step, just taking time to be present, being aware. And so I think once we do that in terms of setting the foundation, the next step is kind of like cultivating the environment, right? So, there's a couple things that I think open the door for that. One of the strategies that I'm a proponent of are questions at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day, when it comes to drop off, right? So sometimes we might say, how are you feeling today? And they'll say good. And then that's it, right? But there's an opportunity at breakfast or on the way to school to ask things like, what are you looking forward to today? What are you excited about today? Is there anything that you are concerned about today? Is there anything that you're worried about today? And by naming it in that way, it gives them an opportunity to start to check in with themselves at the start of a day, but also to unpack with you. Like, actually, I have a test today and I'm nervous about it. Well, what are you nervous about? Oh, well, I don't know if I studied enough. And then you can talk through kind of the actions that led them there and turn it into a learning lesson. Same thing with pickup. I always advocate, go beyond the how was your day, right? Like, how was your day? Good. And I have a 7th grader. So those answers have gotten shorter and shorter the older she has gotten. So what used to be like, let me tell you all about my day, is like, good, fine. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important that we change some of the questions we ask so that we can build that safe space. So I like to ask questions like, what made you happy today? What made you sad today? What made you mad today? What made you frustrated? How have you helped someone? And we've asked those questions since they were in daycare. And now that they're in middle school, we still ask those questions. And so it starts to create a space where you're identifying emotion, you're teaching them to identify emotion, but you're also showing them that we don't expect you to have a great day every day. We don't expect you to be happy every day. And that opens the door for resilience. And so to your point, when people are like, oh, get over it, you're like, you don't need to dwell on that or dwell on this. The idea is like, okay, well, if you're frustrated about something, what made you frustrated? Let's talk through that. And then helping to unpack things so that you can teach strategies. I think that goes hand in hand, because if we don't model how to unpack difficult situations, then we can't expect them to just learn on their own. So if I have a difficult day, sometimes I'll talk it through with my daughters so that they can see, like, I don't have an easy day every day either. If I have to cry, then I cry, and, I keep it pushing and say, okay, I got to write my problems down. I got to journal it out, or I need to do some self-talk, some positive affirmations. And so those are all strategies that I always tell educators and professionals and parents, build those tools in the toolkit. You know, have those positive affirmations that you say every day. Have those positive affirmations in their lunchbox or on their folders, so that when they need it, they have a toolkit to pull from for the days that they really, really need to have their cup filled.
I really like that, because also in asking those questions of your children, right, as parents, sometimes we don't think about those things for us either. So like, what makes us frustrated? And then when we can name it, then we can start to unpack it. And I think that's the first step in, you know, being able to like take care of ourselves in order to help nurture that resilience and grit for our kids, you know. I never really thought about it like that, but I think that's awesome.
I really do love that. And I think about we were just on another podcast where I said something about children having stress, and they were like, kids don't have stress. Like, what do you mean they stress out? And I was like, well, they do. It looks different than our stress, of course. But I think we are working with like a generation of parents that like their parents did not listen to them and their emotions, right? And so some of us are still working on that process of how do I make time to intentionally check in with myself, let alone with my child, right? And so I think some of us have done the work, some of us are doing the work, some of us are not there at all. So kind of like some tips, or what would you say for a parent that's like, I know I probably should be doing this, but I don't really know how to, and it makes me really uncomfortable to do it. So but I need to do it. So how do we get that parent like engaged, or that even that educator, right? Because I have teachers that are like, the child's place is to sit down at this desk and listen to what I'm teaching them, right? And so they're not regulated adults. Like, so how do we help those folks?
Yeah, so I always say I had a crash course in all the don't do's, right? So my father was born on a small farm in Augusta, Georgia, the first of 6 to go to college. My mom migrated from Jamaica to the United States. So there wasn't this space of like, let's talk about our feelings, let's gentle parent. So that wasn't a thing, right? And so I really was focused on, you know, when I found out I was going to be a mom, and I was so excited, and I was like, okay, what are all of the things that I could identify that I want to do better, or I want to do differently than my experience? Because I always believe that we have a tremendous power to create whatever kind of future that we'd like to create for ourselves, right? So the first thing that I would recommend in those spaces is to take time to identify what experiences did you have growing up, a parent or from an adult or from an educator, that are triggers for you, that shut you down, that made you feel upset, that made you feel inadequate, that made you feel like you weren't enough. And what was the impact of it, right? Like recognizing those triggers, recognizing those specifics, and then saying, okay, so now I know what it feels like to be an educator that calls on kids to make them feel bad, that, you know, belittles kids. Okay, I've seen it before, or I felt it myself. Now, what can I do to make sure that I don't do that? Right. So I feel like the first step is like, we all have a don't do that we can refer to, whether it was a parent or an adult in our life or an educator or somewhere. And so I feel like the first step is like just remembering what that felt like and remembering what it looked like, so that you can be very intentional in identifying when you do that. Like if you got a really good don't do list, that's a really good starting point. Right. And so I think once you can identify that side of it and you start to check in with yourself, then the other side is like, what are your goals? What do you want that person to feel like in your classroom? And what do you want that child to feel like when they're at home? And then once you identify what that end goal is, then you work backwards to say, now, what are the things that I can try to do to create that from my own experience as a child, from my own, you know, lived experience, and let that be a starting point, and not compare ourselves, but rather start to make those lists of like basic things. Like, I'm going to set aside 30 minutes every day to just sit down and talk to my child. Or I'm going to make sure that I ask at least one question on the way to school and one question on the way home, uninterrupted, no phone, no, you know, video game. Like, So really just starting to dive into, what do I want this to feel like? And then as an educator, I don't know about you guys, but I was big on feedback, and I always have been big on feedback. In the classroom, I would give my students a survey, every quarter, at the end of every semester, to say, what did I do well? What can I do better? What did you like? What did you not like? That kind of a thing. But how often do we do that with the other avenues in our life, right? And so our kids are really honest. And sometimes we're not ready for the honesty. But I tell you what, if we ask them, they'll tell you. So the other thing that I believe in is checking in. Like from when my kids were in daycare, and I was talking to other parents and having them do it with their kids. And for the last few years, I've advocated, and I say, make sure you're not in your feelings, because if you really want to grow, you got to be ready to receive. So the same way that you in the classroom would ask your student, hey, what am I doing well? What can I do better? How can I be a better teacher for you? Ask that of your kids regularly. What am I doing really well as a mom? Because guess what? I don't have a manual. I didn't have a book to read. Nobody told me what to do when I was trying to figure out this momming thing. Same like in the classroom. You can take all the classes in the world until the students are looking at you and you're like, ooh, that lesson did not go the way I thought it would. That I got to revamp that. Let's do something else and I'll try again tomorrow. Right. So I always say, like, make time to ask your kids, like, what am I doing well? What am I doing well as a mom? What could I do better? Am I giving you enough time and attention? Am I not? Are there things that you wish we could do that we haven't? Those kinds of questions very regularly give us an opportunity to check in. And not only should we do that with our kids, but do it with our spouse. Hey, I've been kind of busy. How am I doing as a wife? What am I doing well? What can I do better? And so it's just, when you get in a spirit of wanting to grow and wanting to be at peace, you have to check in with those people that you care about. And if my 2 and 3-year-old can give me a, no, mommy, I don't like the dinners that you're cooking, or I don't like how late you stay at work, because then you can start having conversations like, okay, how about we do one late night of working late? And then the other ones, I'll come home on time, let you, be with you until you go to bed, and then I'll get back to my work, right? So like, what can you do to negotiate what their needs are but you have to ask them what their needs are.
Yeah.
So I think it starts with creating that.
Yeah, creating that space. I hear you saying, like, be vulnerable and it won't be the end of the world. Like, be vulnerable, ask the question, get the feedback, because you're still doing great. But it is that moment of like, ooh, do I really want, when you said to your spouse, I was like, I laughed a little bit. Exactly.
You gotta be ready. You gotta be ready. Don't ask for a bad day.
Ready. I hear you saying, be vulnerable, ask the question so that you all can heal and grow together. And so that's pretty dope. So yeah, thank you.
So how do you get to that space? Because I feel like the choice to be vulnerable, like, we know what being vulnerable is going to look like and what it might feel like. And it might not be something that I'm comfortable with or that I'm ready to be comfortable with. So how does someone get ready for that and make that kind of decision?
I think it's a daily choice. I feel like it's the process of healing. We all have traumas that we've experienced. We all have experiences that we carry with us every day and baggage that we hold on to. And so I think, it starts with just the choice to attempt to heal. And when you start to unpack some of the traumas, some of the triggers, when I found out I was going to be a mom, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many things. There's so much pain. There's so much hurt. Like, there's so many things that my grandma carried, that my mom carried, and that I have carried, that if I know I want to be a better mom, I'm going to have to confront these things and I'm going to have to heal from them so that I can try to show up as a better person every day. Right. So I think just acknowledging, whatever's happened that we carry with us and trying to actively work on healing and understand that it's not a destination. Like, every day you wake up and you're like, I'm just going to try to be a little bit better today. I'm just going to try to be a little more at peace today, And so I think that's where it starts. and then you just take one step at a time.
Yeah. And I feel like in doing that as parent educators, we help open the door for our kids to then be vulnerable as well.
Yeah, like I feel like they can sense when you're really trying to make a space to connect. And vulnerability has always been really tough for me. So when I was growing up and when I was in elementary, middle, and high school, I was hiding a lot. Like I didn't want people to know that my mother had a mental illness and that she was in and out of hospitals. And I was, going from this person's house to that person's house. I didn't want them to know that we were having financial struggles. I didn't want them to know that I was moving from one year to the next. So that's why I moved from school to school all the time. Like there were so many things that I was like, I just never want people to know anything about me. And then I realized, like, as I became a teacher and then an administrator, there was this power in vulnerability. And the more that people saw some of the experiences you were going through, the more they were like, wait a minute, I'm not the only one. Oh my gosh. And then their walls would start to go down. And then you start to realize this journey of being vulnerable is not about the judgment that we can get scared of. Like all of us are scared of people to know the stuff, right? And so you realize that sometimes it's not about the judgment as much as how can we use our vulnerability to connect, to notice that student when you look in their eyes and there's something there. And sometimes they might not be ready to talk about it. And that's where usually I'll just ask them, are you ready to talk about it? Would you like a hug? And sometimes they'll cry and sometimes they'll talk. But the point is that they at least know that you see them. And I think that's where we start to create that connection, and we start to create spaces where people say, wow, you really care about me as an individual. And when I'm ready, I know I can come to you and talk to you. And that's as a mom, that's as a teacher, that's as an administrator, just as an individual. If you just let people know that you're there and you want to create a safe space for them.
Can you talk a little bit about advocacy? So, in my life, like in school for my kids and in our personal life, like it's most people, right? Like most people. And when I think about like vulnerability and having these conversations with people from previous generations, I think about the idea of respect, right? And like what they think is respectful, what they think is not, what they think that needs to be questioned about, and what you should just get over. So, like, and another thing that I see, especially having boys, is that people, right? Like men and women, I think sometimes feel like they have to like talk to boys rough in order to make them rough and tough. And I wish we had a man on here because I would love a male's perspective of that. But also, just wanted to if you could speak to like how do you advocate for or with your child in a situation where they are clearly like carrying something that was said by somebody who means well and who loves them, but is not like saying it in a way that is like helpful, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So I think there's some basic human principles that I try to advocate that kids understand, so that in any situation, they kind of have at least some basics, right? So one is public confrontation. It never goes well, right? If you if you have a friend that you are having a disagreement with, don't go up to them in front of the cafeteria in front of 500 kids and ask them if they have a problem, because they're going to say yes, right? Because they can't look soft. They can't, right? The same thing with an adult. If you disagree with an adult in front of the whole class, that's not going to go too well, because now it turns into a public power struggle. And so one of the things that I advocate for kids is knowing time and place. So it's important that you advocate for yourself, but there's a way. So first being, make it a private conversation. Go before class, go after class, send it in a one-on-one message, but don't turn it into a public in front of the whole class kind of I'm going to advocate for myself right now, because the power dynamics of that space are always going to turn into, well, now I'm going to give you a referral. Now you're going to get disciplined. But really at the core, you were right. It was just how you went about doing it, right? So being aware of just the basic human nature of not wanting to be embarrassed and not wanting to have to prove something or get into a power struggle, is the first thing of advocacy that I would highlight. And then secondly, looking at tone, looking at timing. So making sure that they check in with themselves, because if I'm frustrated and mad when I'm telling you that I'm advocating for myself, that's probably not going to go well either. So I need to make sure that I'm in a calm space and I am clear about the facts, not feelings, that I'm about to share, so that I can advocate for myself in a calm way, right? And then if it's private, it's calm, it's rooted in facts, and then it just becomes a what's the best way. And that's why I say, is it before school, is it before class, is it after school, is it at the end of class, is it during recess, like identifying what are the times that would be ideal for this to be a conversation that is fully focused, that's not when that person is doing a bunch of other things or distracted by other things, but that they can fully be in the moment, are just some of the ways that advocacy can happen. And if you lead with the facts and you lead in a calm, private manner, typically the outcome will somewhat go well. But then I also say create a space where they can come and talk to you about it. So if they do feel wronged and they don't feel comfortable in the moment advocating for themselves, create a space where they can come home and say, hey, this happened, I don't agree with it. Let's talk through what it looks like for me to advocate for myself. And if you teach the power of voice at a young age, you can cultivate that skill as they get older. You can start helping them understand the boundaries of being respectful, and ooh, that probably wasn't the right way to say that. But if you teach them not to advocate for themselves and to just deal with whatever comes their way because life is unfair, then they're never going to understand the power of their voice. So the only way for them to do that is to feel comfortable advocating. I remember during the pandemic, I was like blown away because one of my daughters was, I don't know, maybe like in second grade. And she sent a message to her teacher that was like, I got the grade back for the test, but the answers that were marked wrong were incorrect. Can you please review the answers that were marked wrong, because I got them right? And I was like, oh my gosh, you sent that to a message to your teacher? Oh, I'm going to get a phone call. I don't know how this is going to go. And then her teacher wrote back and was just like, oh my gosh, you're right. I don't know why it marked those wrong, but your answers were correct. I'll correct your grade. And so it turned into a family conversation around what if you didn't feel comfortable to advocate for yourself? What if you didn't speak up when you knew those were correct answers, but you were just going to take it because she's the teacher and she's supposed to know? So I think the more that we can empower our kids to advocate for themselves using facts, using a calm tone and in a private way, but also knowing that if you advocate for yourself and the outcome isn't what it needs to be, I'm going to back you. Because sometimes they feel like, I'm going to advocate for myself, and what if it goes left, then what? And it's like, well, come home, because then I'm going to send an email to the teacher. Then I will call and request a conference. But you're the first line of defense. It's your grade. It's your, whatever the impact is, it's on you. So I want you to advocate first, but know that I'm right behind you. I'm going to be right there like, okay, well, she did write you about the grades. You didn't respond. So I'd like to request a conference now, because we're really trying to make sure that we're partnering with you, and you're not helping us help her be successful. And so I think that would be the best way to start advocacy.
Yeah, I love that. I used to teach my kids that, especially like when I taught 8th grade. That was my favorite thing. Like, advocate for yourself, be respectful, but closed mouths don't get fed. If something, let me know. And it's the same that I'm trying to do with my oldest son, with Lucas. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Lucas came home and said, my teacher doesn't like to be wrong, so whatever, I just let her be wrong. I was like, ooh, okay.
Yeah, it goes into that time and place. And I kind of wanted to keep going with the time and place for just this next question, because I'm kind of curious. Is right now we're ending the school year. Maybe our kids have like safe spaces, like, or the educators, like, we know all of this in a classroom and we kind of know how they work, and we've created these spaces for them. So looking at like the summer, and now we might have different students, we might have different teachers. Like, what are things that like we can do with like this new environment of students and teachers that's really a short period of time and during the summer to make sure that it is a safe like, place for them, a mentally sound space for them, and they're still able to like use some of those skills? What would you suggest there?
So I guess I can give a perspective as an educator, but also as a parent and for the children. As an educator, I would say creating systems in the classroom that create the space that you'd like to create. So doing things like a wellness check at the start of the class and the end of the class. If you plan that into your agenda, then you know the beginning and end of your class is going to incorporate an identification of emotion and a space where you're recognizing that emotions exist, right? um, Creating an opportunity for personal connection and belonging. Those sometimes people feel like the icebreakers are a waste, or creating activities that are team building is a waste. But if done correctly, those things allow the children in the room to feel like they're not alone, to feel like other people can connect with them. And that sense of belonging is a protective factor when it comes to mental health. And so helping them feel connected, helping them feel like they belong, whether it's a class chant or a class slogan, like the little things that allow them to feel a part of something more than just coming every day for a short period of time, I think are some of the foundational things that can be done in a classroom. And then setting norms that make sure it's very clear that this is a safe space, that laughing at anyone or isolating anyone will not be tolerated, and giving voice to emotional intelligence, giving voice to recognizing that all of us are human beings. And I expect us to create an environment where we all can have days where we're sad or mad or frustrated, but that we're going to give each other an environment where we're building each other up. And we're incorporating things like positive affirmations or self-talk or encouraging words that will help one another on the days that we need it. And so those are some tips that I would give educators during summer, where you don't have as much time, but you have enough time to create a space that's valuable. For parents, I would say do your research. Find out, like, what does the agenda of the day look like? What are the programs that they're going to be engaged in? If you can talk to parents that have sent their children there before, ask questions so that you kind of just have a full picture of what the summer school experience will look like. Do a tour if you can. And for the social anxiety piece, and I don't know about you guys, but the first day of starting anything new is just scary, right? Like, to this day, if we're walking into something that we've never been to before, whether it's a conference or a workshop or whatever the case is, it's kind of like, what am I going to say when they ask me the questions at the beginning and the icebreakers, and like, can I just be in the back corner to myself and nobody talk to me? And so as a parent, I know that those are some of the things that create anxiety. And so I recommend that you have some question stems for your kids as they meet new people, right? So I try to give them some ideas, like, as you meet someone new this first 2 weeks, ask them questions like, what school do they go to? Because you're all coming from different, places when you go to this summer camp. So what school they go to, what clubs are they in? Do they play any sports? And so by giving them a couple questions, then they don't feel that social awkwardness of like, what do I say to make new friends? What do I say to, you know what I mean? And so those are just little things that, for that age, what kinds of things they might be able to talk about. And so you can kind of give some questions there. And then also give like sample responses for those icebreaker. Like, we all know they're going to ask, like, what's your hobby? Something interesting about yourself. And nothing's worse than they ask and you're like, I don't know what to say. Oh my gosh, now I got to go to the bathroom, like, and hope that I miss it. Right. And so you kind of like go through those things. Like, what are some things that we've done that you can say was, your best part of your last school year? Or What are you most excited about summer? What's your favorite hobby? Like, what are some of the things that we can plan your answers now so that when they ask it at the beginning, you're like, I'm ready for this. I know what I can say, And then for students, I just say, have the conversations with your children around what are your feelings about going to camp? What are you excited about? What are you nervous about? And that'll also help you, better prepare them to identify those things that you can talk through in advance. Having questions like, what does a successful day look like? What does a successful week look like? And so like one of my daughters was like, that I can talk to one person today. Like, I will force myself to talk to one person before this day is over. And then if she does it, she's met her goal. And if not, it's like, all right, so before the end of the week, you'll make one friend before the end of the week, right? So, having them set their own goals for what their expectations are from camp. What do they want to get out of it? Do they want to learn a new skill? Do they want to make new friends? Do they want to go somewhere they haven't gone? And so giving them that time to identify those things, and then just teaching them some coping skills, whether it's breathing techniques, if you want to, do the balloon breath or the the 5 fingers, or soft belly breathing, drawing, journaling, affirmations, like filling their toolkit with things so that if they show up to summer camp and a week or a month in, they're having a tough day, they have tools in their toolkit. And so I always try to teach those tools, because as adults, a lot of times we don't have the tools. And so that's why it's so important for me to help adults to add some tools to their toolkit. So on the days that you need it, you're not scrambling because you didn't prepare. Right. So if we can make sure that our kids have some tools in their toolkit, then when they need it, their first day may go great, their first week may go great, but someday during the summer, they're going to have a difficult time. What are some tools that we can make sure that they have so that they can navigate those difficult days?
That was amazing. I feel like those last couple of minutes were so valuable. And if people do not listen to anything else, which I hope they will listen to the whole thing, because I think it was all amazing. But that, especially like the social anxiety and how to like get them prepared. I think those strategies are excellent, because my son, he's 6, and he'll ask me a million questions. Well, he did before. He asked me a million questions. And at the end, he was just like, Mommy, I just don't know what to expect. And like that's big for him. So I will definitely be using some of those tips to help him be ready for the first day. And I think what I would say about this conversation in general is I feel like you kind of start not changing kids, but to give us all these strategies on how to like make space for like who they are. And I think that's really important. So thank you for being with us today, and thank you for what you do. I can't wait to like follow you and learn more.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And yeah, that's the journey, right? The whole idea of Intentionality Wyns is that we're all on our healing journey. And if we can create healing for ourselves, then we can create cultures at work and at home that allow us to not only be at peace with ourselves, but to help cultivate relationships that are grounded in peace and grounded in emotional balance. And so that to me is what leadership is. That's what parenting is. That's what being an educator is. A mom, all that, all the wife and the sister and everything else that we have on our long list of hats that we wear. And so I'm so grateful at the opportunity to have engaged with all of you and shared some of the strategies that I think really will help us on our journey with becoming the best version of ourselves each and every day.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I know I'm going to be putting in some of those questions on our car ride. I got to work up to the what am I doing as a wife question, but I'm going to get there.
You got to be ready. Don't ask when you're already in a mood.
You're right. Right.
And maybe not ask everybody at the same time. Like maybe, you get a month, you get a month, you get a month. Maybe I ask one person per quarter, because
Right. Feedback overload.
Right. Oh man.
Right. It had me crying thug tears.
Oh man. Well, thank you again so much for being here. We really, really do appreciate you and what you do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I
Thank
appreciate you, and I appreciate the opportunity for us to connect.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you everybody for listening or watching. You can find us at the Be Ready Podcast on YouTube. So please like, share, comment, subscribe, all the things. You know what to do. Until next time. Bye.